It was 5 a.m. when the alarm snapped me from my sleep. I briefly forgot where I was, but the 28-degree temperatures forcing their way through the walls of the tent did a pretty good job of jogging my memory. As the fog in my brain lifted, the first coherent thought I could form was, what the hell did I get myself into? I was in the middle of nowhere, in a tent with someone I barely knew. But over the next few weeks, that would all change. Look, I'm no stranger to the outdoors. I grew up in them. But hunting? I was 17. I had a cheap compound bow that I got for Christmas. Had a tag for deer, and I took a shot at a buck, but I missed it. And I haven't hunted since. What about you, man? How long have you been hunting?
I would say we started hunting when we were 10, me and my twin. Super close with my brother, really good hunter as well. I just had to have something that challenged myself, physically, mentally. I was used to pushing myself. And I remember that first season after high school, we went out, and that was it. I fell in love. Just full on passion. As I got older, I realized the benefits, especially mentally, man. We live such fast lives. I think 2020 really put things into perspective. Being out here and just being able to finally focus again, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Eliminate all that noise. It's been peaceful.
You definitely feel it, huh? Just detaching from everything. Just quiet, no interruptions, none of the political nonsense. It's just nature at its finest.
Yeah, you just don't realize.
When Derek invited me to film this hunt, I accepted the challenge. I wanted to push myself and try something new. I don't think I had any idea what the outcome would be. Derek was bow hunting. He had a tag for deer and one for mountain lion. On this trip, I don't have a bow. I'm along for the ride. And the kind of shooting I do is a little bit different. I shoot through a camera lens. I dabble in wildlife and landscapes, but mostly work in a studio in front of a green screen shooting corporate media. Shooting out here is different. I was out of my element. We were up well before the sun on day one. We were hunting the Arizona desert. Those familiar with this kind of country know how rugged it is. We hiked just under 20 miles in our first 3 days out. I've done my fair share of hiking, but Derek's body fat percentage is probably a third of my own. He trained 7 days a week, all year long for this exact moment, which just reinforced the fact that I was out of my element. We hiked into spots with rumors of big buck sightings that were whispered around town all year long leading up to deer season. And while I still haven't learned what the exact qualifications are, apparently we were after some old toads, whatever that means. As we reached our first lookout point, I was amazed as we sat and glassed and watched the desert come to life before our eyes. Before long, we started seeing does move around, and not long after, we spotted our first buck. It was a rush as we went from glassing to stalking. Every footstep mattered. We wanted to close the gap and get over the hill between us and the deer. As we closed the distance, the deer just happened to circle around to the other side of the hill, just as we came over the top. The wind was at our backs, and they were out in front of us. We all stood in a standoff for a moment within range, and then they spooked, and they didn't stop running until they jumped a fence onto land that we couldn't hunt. It was tough coming home, that trip empty-handed. We put in a lot of work and a lot of miles. but we were still optimistic that there was time left in the season and we'd get another chance. Our next trip started much like the first, up before the sun and putting in miles to start glassing. Except this time it felt different. We were in a new spot, and from the moment the sun came up, there was movement everywhere. Broke, as in his antlers?
Yeah, I'm fighting. You're everywhere in here, dude.
What's that bring account to? We've been sitting here for maybe 5 minutes. You've seen 6 bucks already?
$7 now.
$7.
2 shooters.
We watched bucks push does from left to right. We watched other bucks cross paths with each other. It seemed like a good sign. We spent all day glassing for the right buck. We decided in the afternoon to get a little elevation and look back over the valley we'd been watching. We found a good deer and watched him for a bit before making our move. And just as we were getting ready to climb off the rocks and close the gap, seemingly out of nowhere, a lone quail hunter appeared with 2 dogs running out in front of him, headed right for our deer. By the time we scrambled off the rocks in an attempt to head him off, it was too late. The deer had spooked and we watched them run up the mountain and over the ridge. It wasn't the quail hunter's fault, he didn't know we were there, but it was unlucky and it put a damper on the high spirits we'd had all day. Empty-handed, we made our way back to camp as the sun began to set. We stayed positive heading into the next morning, our last day to hunt. We knew the deer were there. We just had to pick one and get in close. And that's exactly what we did. We found a good-sized buck bedded down near another doe. And this is when my heart really started to pound. This was the closest we'd been all season to actually taking a good deer. When Derek signaled to take my boots off, I thought he was crazy, but I quickly followed along. We were stalking in our socks. I had no idea this was even a thing. I became conscientious of every sound, realizing that any sound I made could potentially cost Derek his deer. It was this hyper-awareness of my surroundings that I had never experienced as a photographer. Derek would go on to cross the ravine and see if he could get within range while I stayed back to film. I kept my eyes glued to the buck, still bedded down, and waited for what seemed like ages for Derek to appear on the other side. And finally, he did, working his way uphill towards the deer. He closed the gap and was within 60 yards, just downhill from the deer, the wind at our faces. It was perfect. As Derek held his position, contemplating whether or not to pop out, surprise the buck and take a shot, or wait for them to stand up and move towards him, another doe walked in from out of nowhere and stood the buck up. I let Derek know that they were on the move, figuring they would head downhill straight for him. He knocked an arrow and got ready. Time seemed to stand still. I was anxious. I wanted to make sure I was filming in the right spot. I wanted to make sure Derek got his shot and I was able to capture it. My heart sunk as I watched them all round the tree and head straight uphill over the ridge. Another small buck had unknowingly pushed that doe right to our buck, and in a split second, changed the course of our hunt. Our 2020 season was over. Going into this, I thought a successful hunting film had to end with an animal on the ground. I was wrong. And while I might not have captured the taking of a trophy deer, what I did capture is the bow hunting process. I witnessed an unmatched level of dedication and discipline. I just watched this dude hike close to a mile in his socks. But the most profound thing I felt during this entire trip was this deep connection to the survival of our species, to our ancestors. Humans have shared the need to eat since the beginning of time, and we were practicing the most primitive form of providing. It all made sense to me. And while our 2020 season may be over, this is not the end.